Chapter 1. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Jane's heart thudded painfully against her ribcage as she slowly regained consciousness, her senses dulled by the lingering fog of whatever had been used to sedate her. The ground beneath her was hard and cold, and as she blinked the sleep from her eyes, her vision gradually focused on the derelict interior of an old, dusty cabin. The air was musty, filled with the smell of decay and abandonment. Cobwebs adorned the corners of the small room, and the faint light from a broken window cast eerie shadows across the peeling wallpaper. Her wrists ached, the skin chafed from the rough rope that lay severed beside her. With a gasp, she pulled herself to a sitting position, her muscles protesting the sudden movement. She heard the creak of the old bedroom door before she saw it swing open. A tall figure stepped into the threshold, his presence filling the room with a menacing aura. The mask he wore was grotesque, human-like yet distorted, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. He was cloaked in black, blending with the shadows, leaving only the glint of a knife in his hand visible under the dim light. "Run, little girl, run," the masked man's voice was a low, distorted growl. It sent a shiver down Jane's spine as she scrambled to her feet, her body instinctively surged towards the front door, adrenaline pumping through her veins as she blasts through it. The forest outside was a labyrinth of shadows and whispers, the trees towering and ominous under the moonlit sky. Every snapped twig under her foot sounded like a gunshot in the silence that enveloped her. Her breath came in ragged gasps, mist forming in the cold air as she pushed her body to its limits, branches scratching at her face and arms as she plunged deeper into the darkness. Behind her, the sound of pursuit was a constant reminder of the danger lurking. The killer was toying with her, she realized, his steps deliberate and unhurried. Fear gnawed at her insides, a visceral, clawing terror that she felt in every fiber of her being. But it was not just the fear of death that tormented Jane, it was the realization of her utter isolation. Here, in the depths of the North Georgian forest, there was no one to hear her screams, no one to come to her aid. As she ran, her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the evening that had led her here. The argument with Tom, her decision to join Lisa for what was supposed to be a harmless night out, the charming stranger at the bar, each memory flashed through her mind like the frames of a horror film she had unwittingly become the star of. The forest seemed endless, and as she pushed through the undergrowth, her thoughts drifted to Tom. Would he even be looking for her? The harsh words they had exchanged earlier echoed in her ears, their last conversation now a haunting prelude to her current nightmare. Jane stumbled over a root, catching herself against a tree. Her breaths heaved, her body aching, but she dared not stop. She could feel him out there, moving between the shadows, watching her struggle, enjoying the chase. She was terrified. She wanted to scream and surrender just to end this nightmare. But another part, a primal, unyielding part, stirred within her, the desire not just to survive, but to fight back. Chapter 2. Under the shroud of night, Jane pressed on, her legs burning with fatigue. Each labored breath sent a stabbing pain through her chest, yet the terror of being caught propelled her forward. She leaped over a fallen log, the moist soil of the forest floor soft beneath her fleeing steps. Her mind, however, was miles away, ensnared in the haunting memories of the evening. Earlier that night, the city lights had seemed welcoming as Jane met with Lisa. The clink of glasses and the murmur of conversation had been a stark contrast to the suffocating silence of the forest. Lisa, with her infectious laugh and wild energy, had pulled Jane from one bar to another, a desperate attempt to drown the echoes of her marital discord in alcohol and noise. The man at the bar had been a handsome stranger, his smile easy and inviting. Jane remembered the warmth of his hand as he offered her a drink, the way his eyes seemed to undress her soul. In her vulnerable state, his charm was an easy balm, soothing the sting of her argument with Tom. But now, as she darted through the trees, his image was twisted into something sinister. His hands, once gentle and alluring, were now the hands of a captor, his smile a mask of sadistic pleasure. She remembered the moment her drink had started to taste bitter, the room spinning as her consciousness slipped away. guilt and anger churned within her. Lisa had been there, laughing and dancing, oblivious to the danger, pushing her toward the edge. Jane couldn't help but wonder if her friend had seen the signs, had noticed the shift in the man's demeanor. The betrayal stung almost as much as the branches that whipped against her skin as she fled deeper into the wilderness. Chapter 3. The night deepened, the moon casting a pale glow over the twisted paths of the forest. Jane's mind was a haze of fear and determination. Her feet found the rhythm of survival, the crunch of leaves underfoot syncing with the pounding of her heart. Every shadow seemed to come alive, every noise a potential threat. The killer was a ghost in the night, his presence felt but unseen. "Run, little girl, run." His voice would sometimes reach her, a whisper carried by the wind, taunting her, reminding her that this was a game to him, a game she could not afford to lose. Exhaustion clawed at her muscles, her body screaming for rest, but the terror of being caught kept her moving. She knew she had to think, to strategize if she was to outlive this nightmare. In a moment of desperate creativity, she gathered fallen branches, creating misleading trails, hoping to confuse her pursuer. As she maneuvered through a particularly dense thicket, her thoughts drifted to Tom. Regret washed over her as she recalled their last conversation, the harsh words spoken in anger now echoing with painful clarity. The lack of appreciation and validation in their relationship had been simmering for a while. She had felt as if Tom no longer loved her, the butterflies long since disappeared, replaced by routine and numbness. "I have to work, Jane." Tom's words had been tinged with hurt, more disappointed than angry. "It's always work and you have no idea how that makes me feel, Tom. It's about feeling forgotten, feeling like you don't love me anymore." Jane had retorted, frustration coloring her voice. In the heat of the argument, overwhelmed by a mix of anger and desperation, Jane had blurted out something that shocked even herself. "Maybe we should just get a divorce then," she blurted out. The words hung heavy in the air. Tom had gone silent, almost in shock, and the hurt in his eyes was deep and raw. Jane felt a pain of regret, her own words echoing in her mind, leaving her shaken and unable to face the hurt she had inflicted. Unable to respond further, she had stormed out, her heart heavy with guilt and confusion, to meet Lisa. That impulsive decision, born from her emotional turmoil, now haunted her as she navigated the perilous darkness of the forest. Chapter 4. The relentless pursuit forced Jane deeper not only into the forest but into the recesses of her own past. Between the ragged breaths and the rush of adrenaline, memories of her and Tom surfaced, better times filled with laughter and love, now shadowed by recent conflicts. Navigating through a particularly rocky terrain, Jane's foot slipped, sending her tumbling down a small embankment. Pain radiated up her leg as she landed awkwardly, her ankle throbbing. Lying there, the cold seeping through her clothes, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. As she clutched her throbbing ankle, Jane's mind whisked her away to the night she had arrived at Lisa's home, tears streaming down her face, her heart heavy with regret. Lisa had opened the door, her expression shifting quickly from surprise to concern. "Jane, what happened?" Lisa had asked, guiding her to the sofa, her voice a soothing balm. "It's Tom. We had a fight," Jane managed between sobs, her fingers nervously playing with her wedding ring. "I said things. Horrible things about divorce." Lisa had listened, nodding sympathetically as Jane poured out her heart. But as the night deepened, Lisa's comforting words subtly changed in tone. "Maybe you're right to feel this way. You and Tom have been on edge a lot lately. Maybe he just doesn't understand you anymore." Jane, vulnerable and seeking validation, had absorbed Lisa's words, feeling her own guilt ebb away, replaced by a growing resentment towards Tom. "Maybe I am justified," she had thought, Lisa's encouragement embedding itself into her shaken convictions. Lisa had seen her moment. "You need to forget tonight. Just be Jane, not someone's wife, not someone's burden." As they prepared to leave for the bar, Lisa had pointed at Jane's wedding ring. Leave this here. You won't need it tonight. Tonight, it's all about you. And Jane, swayed by her friend's persuasive tone and her own turbulent emotions, had complied. She left the ring on the table, a symbolic act of shedding her marital woes, not realizing the gravity of that decision. Now, back in the cold embrace of the forest, Jane cursed her gullibility. She had walked into the night fueled by manipulated emotions, her friend's ulterior motives hidden behind layers of feigned support. The pain in her ankle was sharp, a stark reminder of her current reality, but it was the ache in her heart that burned fiercer. She had been played, her marital strife used against her in the most cruel way. Anger flushed through her veins, mixing with the adrenaline. She pushed herself up, testing her weight on her injured ankle. The pain was sharp but manageable. She had to keep moving. Chapter 5. The night enveloped Jane like a suffocating shroud as she hobbled through the gnarled branches of the foreboding forest. Every shadow seemed to twist into the shape of her pursuer, every rustle of leaves a whisper of impending doom. The sharp pain in her ankle intensified with each step, a cruel reminder of her vulnerability. The killer's voice echoed through the trees, a chilling refrain, "Run, little girl, run," that spiked her veins with ice. Exhausted, her breath fogging in the chill air, she collapses against a tree. Out of habit, she finds herself grabbing for her ring. It had always calmed her mind in moments of stress, but it was not there. Tears flow from her eyes as she looks down at the white tan line where her wedding ring used to belong. A stark reminder of what she had risked, what she might already have lost. Jane's mind reeled back to the bar where the night had taken a sinister turn. She had felt alive, dangerously flirtatious, as she lost herself in the kisses of a handsome stranger. The warmth of his touch had sparked something within her, a yearning for excitement long suppressed by the monotony of her strained marriage. She remembered the thrill, the rush of desire, the way her heart had raced, feelings that had been dormant, feelings that Tom hadn't stirred in her for a long time. But as the stranger's hand ventured too boldly, reality shattered her intoxication. The sudden touch on her breast had snapped her out of her reverie, flooding her with guilt. The bar, the noise, the dance of lust and laughter around her, everything became oppressively real. She had tried to stand, to escape the mounting panic and the looming betrayal, but her legs had betrayed her, weakened by whatever had been slipped into her drink. Now, as she leaned against a gnarled tree, her body racked with sobs, the memory of her helplessness felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She cursed herself for succumbing to a moment of folly, for letting her guard down at the cost of her safety. The thought that Lisa had been there, reveling in the chaos of the night, oblivious or indifferent to her friend's plight, stung bitterly. How had Lisa not noticed her sudden absence? The reality was harsh. Lisa, always the life of the party, had likely been too engulfed in her own revelries to care. Tears streamed down Jane's cheeks as she considered the magnitude of her mistake. The weight of what she had done, and what had been done to her, felt crushing. Even if she survived this nightmare, what would be left of her life? Would Tom even want her back, knowing what she had done, however unintentionally? Each tear that fell now was a mix of fear, regret, and anger. Anger at herself for the lapse in judgment, at the man who had taken advantage of her vulnerability, and at Lisa for her neglect. The darkness of the forest seemed to press in on her, a physical manifestation of her despair. Pulling herself from the tree, Jane wiped her tears, her face setting into a mask of determination. This was not how her story would end. Chapter 6. The night deepened around Jane, the moonlight casting eerie shadows through the dense foliage of the forest. Each step was a battle against the pain that shot through her sprained ankle, a constant reminder of her vulnerability in this dark, unforgiving wilderness. Her senses were heightened to a razor's edge, every rustle of leaves and distant snap of a twig sending jolts of adrenaline through her weary body. The killer's voice sliced through the silence again, chilling and disembodied, taunting her from somewhere in the darkness. "Run, little girl, run." The words reverberated around her, a macabre echo that seemed to come from all directions, enveloping her in fear. With grim determination, Jane stopped briefly, scanning the ground until her fingers closed around a solid, baseball bat-sized tree branch. Gripping it tightly, she prepared herself for the confrontation she knew was inevitable. The air was thick with tension, the quiet so profound she could hear her own heart pounding in her chest. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. The killer sprung from the shadows, the attack swift and brutal. Jane barely had time to react as the knife plunged into her shoulder, the pain searing and immediate. She screamed, the branch falling from her numb fingers as she crumpled to the ground. Panic gripped her as she turned over, desperately reaching for her wound but finding herself unable to touch it. Lying on her back, gasping from the pain, she looked up into the face of her attacker. The killer, shrouded in black and wearing a grotesque mask, loomed over her, the knife gleaming ominously in the moonlight, raised for a fatal strike. In that moment, Jane felt a despair so profound she believed her life was truly over. But survival instinct spurred her into action. With a defiant yell, she grasped for the fallen branch, swinging it with all the strength she could muster. The branch connected with a sickening thud against the killer's face, knocking them backward and off balance. Gritting her teeth against the pain, Jane pushed herself up from the cold ground, clutching the branch like a lifeline. She fought against the dizziness threatening to overwhelm her as she saw the killer staggering, the mask knocked askew. Then something small and round fell to the ground, a voice changer, the device that had distorted the killer's voice into those haunting taunts. As the killer cursed and spat blood, Jane froze, the voice unmistakably feminine. When the killer turned back, the mask was gone, revealing a face Jane knew all too well, Lisa. Blood trickled from a cut on her face, her smile menacing and twisted. "Lisa?" Jane whispered, disbelief clouding her voice as she stared at her best friend, not the mysterious man from the bar. "That fucking hurt!" Lisa screamed, her expression contorted in rage. Before Jane could process the shock, Lisa's fist connected with her face, the force of the blow knocking the remaining strength from her body. As darkness claimed her, Jane's last conscious thought was a swirling mix of betrayal, pain, and utter disbelief. How could her friend, her confidant, be the architect of her nightmare? As she slipped into unconsciousness, the cold, hard ground of the forest closed in around her, the night once again claiming its silence. Chapter 7. Jane's head throbbed painfully, a sharp sting flaring with each slap from Lisa's hand. Her eyes fluttered open, blurred images gradually coming into focus as she regained consciousness. The cold, dusty surroundings of the old cabin closed in around her, the familiar creaks and groans of the structure a chilling reminder of her predicament. She found herself tied securely to a chair in front of a large table, the rope biting into her wrists. She attempted to rock the chair, seeking any leverage to escape, but Lisa's voice cut sharply through the air, commanding her to stop. "Stop trying, Jane. You're not going anywhere," Lisa stated, her tone harsh and unyielding. Confused and terrified, Jane watched as Lisa paced back and forth like a prison warden. A large butcher knife clutched in her hand reflected by the light of the lantern on the table. The side of Lisa's face was marked by a swelling bruise, a souvenir from Jane's desperate defense in the woods. Every now and then, Lisa winced, her fingers gingerly touching the tender skin. "Why are you doing this?" Jane's voice cracked as she finally broke the tense silence, her mind reeling from the shock of betrayal. Lisa paused, her back to Jane, seemingly gathering her thoughts. When she turned, the look in her eyes was one of cold fury, tinged with madness. "Why?" Lisa echoed mockingly, her voice dripping with venom. "Because you got the life I should have had." Jane frowned, confusion clouding her pain. "What are you talking about, Lisa? You have everything, money, guys." She was abruptly silenced as Lisa slammed the knife into the dusty old table with such force that it sent a cloud of dust into the air and made Jane flinch. "Tom, you stupid bitch!" Lisa screamed, leaning into Jane's face so close she could feel the spit from Lisa's enraged shout. It's always been about Tom, she exclaimed once more in Jane's face. You think I care about those shallow flings? No one has ever loved me like Tom loves you. Jane stayed silent from the shock of what she was hearing. Lisa continued, her voice a mix of fury and hurt. While you played the perfect wife with the happy home, I was alone. You think those men cared about me? They didn't love me, not like Tom loves you. I deserved that love, not you. The harshness of Lisa's words weighed heavily on Jane, revealing a depth of jealousy and bitterness she had never imagined her friend capable of. It was a jealousy so deep it had twisted Lisa's perception of Jane's life into something unrecognizable. I still can't believe you fell for that loser so easily. Lisa spoke with a hint of disappointment. Lisa's eyes flicked to the side, a sneer twisting her lips as she gestured toward another figure in the room, a man tied to a chair beside Jane. It was the handsome stranger from the bar. His head hung forward, lifeless, with blood oozing from a deep gash on his neck. The sight of him, so still and brutalized, sent a wave of nausea through Jane. He was supposed to seduce you and help me get rid of you quietly, Lisa explained with a disdainful glance at the corpse. But he turned out to be useless. Chickened out at the last minute, had no spine. Jane's gaze fixed on the dead man, her heart sinking further into despair. Not like Tom, Lisa continued, her voice softening as she spoke of Jane's husband. Tom is a real man, strong and decisive. And soon, he'll be mine. The cold finality in Lisa's voice chilled Jane to the bone. Tied up and powerless, she realized the full extent of her friend's delusion and depravity. Lisa had orchestrated this entire nightmare, driven by a twisted love and a dangerous envy that knew no bounds. Lisa's pacing intensified, her footsteps echoing in the old, dusty cabin. With the knife still protruding from the table where she had embedded it moments ago, she continued her chilling exposition. It was too easy to lure you out that night, to make you leave your wedding ring behind. Watching you fall into that man's arms. It infuriated me, Jane. Lisa's words cut deeper than the cold steel of the knife. Tom has always been faithful, working tirelessly so you wouldn't have to. Yet there you were, ready to throw it all away over some stupid fight and a handsome face. She paused, her eyes narrowing as she turned back to face Jane. You don't deserve someone like Tom. Overcome with shame and unable to refute the truth in Lisa's accusations, Jane remained silent, tears streaming down her face. Lisa, seeing her distress, smirked with satisfaction and continued to twist the knife of betrayal deeper. When they find your body, Tom will be devastated and I'll be there, Jane, ready to comfort him and eventually make him mine. Jane looked up, desperation and disbelief mingling in her eyes. You won't get away with this, she whispered hoarsely. Lisa's laugh was cold and merciless. Oh, this is the best part, honey, she sneered, leaning close. We're in Blackwood Forest. And when they find you, it won't be me who they blame. Jane's eyes widened in horror as the realization of their location dawned on her. No, are you crazy? She gasped, the old legends of the Blackwood slasher, a mythical killer said to haunt these woods, flashing through her mind. Maybe I am crazy, Lisa retorted, her voice eerie in the quiet of the cabin. But the Blackwood slasher will take the blame for your death, not me. Lisa resumed her pacing, mocking Jane's growing fear. This old ghost story works perfectly for my plan. This cabin, this forest, it's all so perfect. Continuing her pacing, Lisa gloated over her plan. This ghost story will cover my tracks beautifully. Oh. And don't worry about Tom. Or your wedding ring. I will be taking very good care of them for you when you are gone. Lisa smiles wickedly, leaning into Jane. Just as Lisa reached for the knife to finish her gruesome task, she found it missing. Puzzled, she scanned the dimly lit room, her gaze finally falling back to Jane, whose eyes were wide with shock, fixed on something, or someone, behind Lisa. A cold dread filled the room as the floorboards creaked ominously under a new weight. Lisa spun around, her heart racing, only to come face to face with a nightmarish figure, the real Blackwood slasher. His mask was ghastly, his presence imposing and silent as a grave. Lisa barely had time to scream before the blade found its mark, piercing her heart with brutal precision. She fell to the ground, lifeless, as Jane screamed in horror, struggling desperately against her bonds. Standing over her body, a towering figure loomed, clad in a black cloak with a ghostly pale mask. This was no myth, it was the Blackwood slasher himself. Jane's screams echoed through the forest as the real slasher raised an axe high into the air, bringing it down in a swift, horrifying arc. Silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the soft whisper of leaves outside. Upon the mantel behind them sat a faded photograph, capturing a moment long past. In it, a young child with his mother, both smiling brightly at the camera. Beside them stood the father, clad in a flannel shirt, an axe casually resting over his shoulder. Their expressions were filled with joy, a stark contrast to the dark events that now unfolded in the very room where they once shared laughter. The end.